Alice, you're very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. I'm really delighted and thrilled to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much. It's so lovely to be able to come and chat to you.
Yeah, lovely to connect again. We met some months ago and I'm delighted to have you on the show. You know well, our vision is to inspire, connect and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small and medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So I have a feeling you're going to be good at this. What does scaling with purpose mean to you, Alice?
Ooh, well, it's such a good question. I think purpose in general, like that term, when we hear it in a business setting these days, I think it's got all sorts of different connotations now. So for me, it's not just about having some social purpose outside of the business, and it's not just about scaling. It's about doing it in a way as well that is just being a nice business, taking care of the people that are there, taking care of the leaders, and doing it with intent. I think, having a reason for that expansion, that will create so much more motivation for the team and make it, I think, ultimately more sustainable. But I've definitely had a bit of a process the last few years of kind of learning about the slow down to speed up thing. And that's really big for me right now, slow down to speed up. So scaling with purpose is probably not exactly what we did at Social Bite, truth be told. Purpose, certainly in terms of we were a purpose-led organization, we were trying to help homeless people, but not, yeah, we did, it was very fast. All sorts of growth lessons were learned along the way.
Well, look, I want to unpack those growth lessons today. This is a first where, now enter a sixth season. It's the first time we've had someone who has founded a social enterprise on the podcast. Obviously, our listeners are leaders of SMEs, and it's incumbent on those SMEs to be profitable. We advocate that first and foremost, but certainly to be purposeful in doing that, either looking after having a purpose centered on their people or the planet, and certainly having heard you speak at a keynote event some months ago, I felt your story was just fascinating, and there's so much our listeners can learn. So for those, Alice, who aren't familiar with Alice Thompson, can you share a little bit of give the abridged version of your growth story, and then we'll get into some of the lessons.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I think I'd be remiss not to mention Bangladesh, because that's really where it all started. So I was a party animal at university. I was not going to classes. I was not learning from textbooks. So I cleverly decided at the end of second year, I thought, if I stay for third year, my parents will eventually figure out that, I don't think I can pass third year the way I'm behaving. So I think I should break up with university before university breaks up with me. So I went off and I got an unpaid internship, left university, and I sort of convinced my parents, I want to work. And I think they were like, wow, okay, amazing. And I got an unpaid internship with an events company. And funnily enough, that events company was brand new, didn't have any cash themselves. And it was Josh who interviewed me. And we started running events together, these big, ambitious events. We were just a couple of, 19 and 22, I think, years old.
Wow.
And trying to convince people over the phone that we were a lot more grown up than we were, and convincing them to partake in our events. So that was a whirlwind in and of itself, and I could do a podcast on that, but I'll put that to the side and just say that essentially, we started running this event called the Scottish Business Awards, which very much was just called the Scottish Business Awards because we hoped that people would think that it was the Scottish Business Awards, and that we would get away with it, and it seemed to work somehow. So through that process, we wanted a Nobel Peace Prize winner to be the keynote speaker. We had discovered this book called Creating a World Without Poverty, and we knew that in order to get sort of the elite businessmen to buy into this concept, first of all, they would have to never meet us in person, because they would be like, you're 19 years old. There's no reason that I would trust you. And second of all, we would need a keynote speaker that would attract even that kind of clientele. The reason being that the event was going to be all for charity. We were young, idealistic, and we wanted to run an event that was 100% for charity. And we thought it would be really cool, kind of a Robin Hood concept, to bring these wealthy businessmen into the room and then have all of the money raised from there to go towards supporting people who did not have those kind of resources. So this guy, Muhammad Yunus, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, we'd come across his book and decided he was the guy. So he is a Bangladeshi and is based over there, but he has, a global calendar booked sort of 2 years in advance, meeting with people like Richard Branson. And so we were trying to get a meeting with him, or trying to get a date confirmed with him. And we were just really struggling to make any meaningful contact with the people in Bangladesh. So with sort of the office over there, you'd get different people answering the phone every time. And some people would be like, oh, yes, that sounds great. Book him in. And we'd go, yes, he's doing it. Print it, send out the invitations. And then a month later, you'd be like, still haven't heard anything from them after those emails we've sent them. Phone them again. Is he coming to do that event? We don't know what you're talking about. So panic stations. And we realized we're going to have to go to Bangladesh on one of the 4 days that he happens to be there and sort of meet him on his territory and get 5 minutes of his time to convince him to come and do this event that we have now promised to all of these elite businessmen, because we promised him that he's going to be there. So it was a fast-paced nightmare of a journey, really. But actually going to Bangladesh and being there, and then, as a result, we were there for 5 days, and Muhammad Yunus's, incredible concepts that he was doing over there, the way in which he had invented social business in his eyes, and he invented microfinance, which is a whole other thing I won't waffle on about, but it's essentially just sort of turning economics on its head and lending to poor people with no collateral and doing things that Western banks would never dream of in order to try and raise people in poverty out of that situation and bring them into the economic system. So we were traveling around Bangladesh and visiting these micro businesses and these thriving rural communities in the poorest country, one of the poorest countries in the world. So it was a shell-shocking experience. I had no idea how privileged I was. I didn't realize that most of the world doesn't live the way that we live in the West, that kind of generalized term West. But so that for me was that was definitely sort of the beginning. I suppose the real beginning of my growth journey was getting the internship with Josh and having to work my ass off, because if I didn't sell stand, I didn't make money to pay my rent. And that was what was going to keep me in Edinburgh and not having to move back to the Highlands of Scotland where my parents stayed. So that was maybe me starting to learn a bit of accountability to myself. But the Bangladesh thing was where I went, oh, we have more to do here as human beings. We have to think about others. We have to realize that others are not as fortunate as we are, and try and be active in that pursuit. So I think that is probably where the growth journey started, and just evolved and evolved with Social Bytes growth in terms of my business experience, and realizing that I look back and just realize I knew nothing. I'm less sure of myself now than I was when I was 22 and I was like ordering people around in charge of 100 people. I just look back now and I think, what an absolute, am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Of course, if you wish.
I look back now and think it must have been an absolute shit show. Like the kind of things that I was doing to organize the place must have been bizarre. But yeah, so I think from there it became very practical, my growth. And it probably wasn't until about 25 that my own growth journey started to be more internal and a deeper process for me. Yeah.
So that journey to Bangladesh with what became your business partner, Josh, was that a profound that I've just unveiled my purpose here, or was it something that left an indelible mark on you, that you went back into the events company and kind of you continued to do your day-to-day job, but this wouldn't leave you, what you had witnessed in Bangladesh, the poverty and the fact that we were experiencing life very differently in the West than what you experienced and what you witnessed in Bangladesh? Was it a gradual kind of gnawing away at you, which ultimately led to the development or the founding of Social Bytes?
Well, I mean, essentially, I think for me, it was almost like a homecoming. Being in the middle, we did this village homestay in this tiny little village called Terrakandi, which was like 4 hours out from the capital city along like a bumpy road sort of thing. And, no technology, no Wi-Fi, lights go off in the evenings. We were sitting having a cigarette, because I used to smoke, but I don't anymore. But sitting and having a cigarette with these local Bangladeshis with fireflies around, and it just being such a still, and these people that really live like, the beautiful Muslim culture out there, who were taking us in to their homes because they believe that you're my brothers and sisters, and so we always provide for passes through. And just this getting back to basics, with sort of leaving the party girl Alice, who just wanted to be popular and just wanted to, prove my worth, to suddenly being very grounded with these very like salt of the earth real people. I think some of it was, just that it felt profound on that level. And then I think also for me, it's almost quite sort of wonderful, because Josh being there, he started going, it was 4 a.m. in this Bangladeshi village, and neither of us were asleep, and he whispered in the dark, "Are you awake?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "I can't stop thinking about this social business thing, like the level of help that it's creating, because it's bringing people into the economy rather than doing that kind of charity handout thing." And I was going, "Yeah, I'm feeling it. Like, I'm tingling with this whole experience." And right there, we started to put together, I think we've got to go back and not do the events business. I think we've got to do something different. I was loving it, because I was, this sort of idealistic, I wanted to do, I felt very corporate with the event work, and
Yeah.
that was kind of fun. And it was training me in sales and my confidence in business from, age 19. But this was really much more speaking to sort of what I was going to say, speaking more to my soul maybe, but I think it's really in all of us. I don't think it's mine. I think it just spoke to that part of me that maybe wanted to be released. And so I was really excited that Josh wanted to go back and do something quite different. And so right there in Bangladesh, we started saying, right, we're going to do a social business. I think it was like on the plane back that we were like, a cafe, that's easy. We can make sandwiches. We don't have to go and get a different skill to do that. We can decide what tastes good and sell food. So it evolved slowly from there. And Social Bites journey really was, I think people think Social Bites started out thinking, we're going to help the homeless community in Scotland and we're going to be the cafe brand that does that. But that wasn't actually the way it worked. We moved back just so mesmerized by this social enterprise, or specifically sort of in Muhammad Yunus's terms, social business concept as he had defined it, that we wanted to start a social business and demonstrate an example to the rest of the business community. Because, bear in mind, we'd gone to Bangladesh to convince this Nobel Peace Prize winner to come and speak at the Scottish Business Awards for the Scottish business community. So that was kind of where our thinking space was at the time. And it was very much, what impact could we have if we brought this speaker to Scotland to speak about actually turning economics on its head, and the fact that the people in the country here who have the most have a responsibility to give back, and that their job is not done here. So that felt kind of a bit irreverent and exciting to a young couple of people to do that. But really, we thought we got to practice what we preach, start a social business. We'll give 100% of our profits away, and we'll show that business can be used as an engine for good. And we'll just pump profits into charitable organizations so that they can have some kind of consistent income rather than having to be reliant on donations. And that was kind of the dream initially. And it evolved over time once we opened the cafe and we met people who were homeless on the street, and we started to give them hot chocolates because it was cold, and we're like, well, we're a social business, we're meant to be nice, we're going to take that guy a hot chocolate out there because I see him every day on that corner when I walk to this shop. And then he would work up the courage to come in and say, can I have a soup? And then once you start doing that, it's warm inside, so they're hanging out in the cafe all day. And then we're thinking, oh, got this problem now. We've got a homeless person hanging out in the cafe all day, every day. We don't want to deter sort of our paying customers, but having, just to put it bluntly, having a smelly homeless person who's got some slightly quirky social tendencies, like yelling across the cafe to you from the back of the cafe while customers are in that you're trying to serve, and all that kind of stuff, that became a bit of a problem. So it evolved naturally, like, well, maybe if we just gave him a job rather than casting him out, because that's not what we're about. We're a social business, we're meant to be nice. maybe we just give him a job. He can maybe make £2 to £4 out there if he sells a couple of magazines with a big issue on the street. Or we could bring him in here and pay him per hour to do dishes or something, you know. And it started to just evolve and grow from there. And so that's what I mean by sort of, as Social Bite opens, I grew with it as we came across every new obstacle, which, you know, ultimately became an opportunity for us each time.
Let's just get into a couple of things there. Just first of all, distinguish between a social business and a social enterprise or a not-for-profit. Essentially, what we're saying here, you were opening up a business, but the social aspect was, look, whatever profits we make, we're going to redirect those profits into charitable organizations. Is that right?
Yeah, sort of, exactly. So social enterprise is just sort of this blanket term that we use for a business that exists to do good. And that's becoming, you know, it's evolving all the time because it's still so new. And when we started doing it, it was brand new, which I think is part of the reason that we kind of exploded in the way that we did, certainly in Scotland anyway, because no one else was doing what we were doing. It was pretty new. But now there's, you know, all these different legal structures, like you can register a company as a community investment company, or KIC for short. And that has a very specific way in which it works to give back to the community. That counts as social enterprise, but also you can have a limited company that's owned by a charity. That was the legal structure that we went by in the end. So there's all these different ways of doing social enterprise, and different funding bodies also have different criteria that in order for you to access their funding as a social enterprise, you need to have a registered charity, or you need to have a registered KIC, or you need to, you know, fulfill any of their particular criteria. I'm a firm believer these days in, you know, so a lot of my clients that are social enterprises, like, I know you were going to ask me about this later, but some of the social enterprises that I support for free as part of my continuing to try and give back, I've met some of these young people that are inspired to do something good with business, and they've been a bit deterred because they've gone for funding and they've been told, oh, you don't meet our criteria for a social enterprise, so you can't access our funding. I very much want to kind of unleash people's abilities. Just think, if you've got a business who is prioritizing doing good as well as profit, or just breaking even, depending on what kind of business model you want to follow, that's a social enterprise. And like, just because that funding body says that's not what we think social enterprise is, that doesn't mean that you can't be a social enterprise and you can't have social objectives and keep them in your KPIs that you evaluate each year, and try and grow your social impact as you grow your income and all of that. So social enterprise is just very sort of, it's a bit of a muddy term, like different people will have different definitions for it. Social business, in terms of sort of Muhammad Yunus's context, he's written a book about how to build a social business, and he has some very specific ways in which he says you can do that. And I love what he does because he has some things that I think are really cool, like the person who makes the most money, the person who's paid the most by that business, should never be more than 7 times the wage of the lowest paid person per year. So I love that because he acknowledged that the capitalist system has merit in that having levels of promotion and something to strive for, and, you know, working your way up that pay grade is an effective and important part of motivation and our human desire for progress. But he also acknowledged that you could become greedy with that. And, you know, charities and stuff sometimes do get a bad rep because their CEOs are being paid 150 grand a year or whatever. And so I really liked that he had really scientifically decided how that could and should work. So he has a very specific model.
What else, Alice? I'm really curious now that you've got in. I've never heard of that kind of 7 times, putting a cap on the highest paid person at 7 times the lowest paid person. Anything else that you found?
I could be getting that wrong. I think it's 7 times because I haven't read the book in about 10 years. Maybe I should read it again. But yeah, so it's something like that. But also he has things like, so Muhammad Yunus will never own a single share in his company. He has 50 different social businesses, social enterprises in Bangladesh. And they are owned by the people to serve the people.
Oh, yeah.
So, for example, Muhammad Yunus realized in Bangladesh, because there's really no infrastructure, it's such a poor country, and, you know, essentially the government has to more, I mean, all governments are corrupt to some extent, really, aren't they? But in Bangladesh, where there's just less checks and balances, that is more rife. So he acknowledged that, in order to create some sort of infrastructure, perhaps business was the best tool to do that. So he wanted to create businesses that the country needed as part of its infrastructure without owning any of it. So we get off the plane in Bangladesh and you turn your phone on and you have Grameen Network is just what your cell phone automatically finds. Grameen is the name of his sort of umbrella company. So he has Grameen Bank, he has Grameen Eye Care Hospital, he has Grameen phone network. So all of these things that the country needed, if he could find a way to build a business that would put that into the economy, into the infrastructure of the company, and have it owned by the poor people that need to use that company, then that's what he would do. So the banking system that he developed over there is absolutely revolutionary. It blows my mind that we're not doing it more in the West, but he has started to, I think about 10 years ago, maybe a bit longer, but 12 years ago or so ago, he started working with New York, he started doing the Grameen Bank for poor people in New York. And that was really starting to take off around the time that we met him. And there's a documentary about him and his work called To Catch a Dollar, which I'm sure you can probably find that online these days.
Yeah, we'll see if we can put a link to it in the show notes. So we could do another podcast on Muhammad Yunus. No, and I know it's fascinating. I want to come back a little bit. Just to kind of continue on our social bites journey, you guys, and it'd be interesting to know if you articulated as a purpose at that point in time when you and Josh came back from Bangladesh. Was that the language you used? But certainly it's what we commonly know as a purpose. You had kind of unearthed a purpose, something that you were really drawn to. At that point, did you have a conversation about what this could be in terms of what we would call a vision for the future? So you opened a cafe anchored on your purpose of giving back and doing good, giving you the experience that you had in Bangladesh. A couple of things there. Did you call it purpose at that stage? Did you articulate it? And did you craft a vision for where you could go? Was it 100 cafes? What happened from there, Alice?
Yeah, so I don't think we used the word purpose at the time. I think purpose-led business or having a purpose is perhaps more recent, that kind of terminology. But for us, it was social business, social enterprise, social impact. And that was the terminology that we were using. And that was why we called it Social Bite. We had many debates about that, because Josh and I we had a dear friend of mine, Lucy, was also technically a co-founder. She worked with us for the first 6 months, but then she went off to run incredible events around the UK, which she's really talented at. But she was involved as well. And Lucy and I were really trying to argue with Josh, saying, I don't want social in the title. Like, Josh wanted to call it Social Sandwich. And we were just like, no way. That's the worst thing I've ever heard of. And so we really didn't want that aspect. We wanted to come up with like a clever little name. So there was another cafe in Edinburgh called Etiquette, and they serve really great tea. So it's Etiquette. So we thought there must be something kind of clever that we can call it that sort of speaks to the nature of what we do, but just is a bit cooler. And we compromised on Social Bite. But we wanted that in the title. Essentially, in the end, that was what Josh convinced us with, was, people have to know this is a social endeavor. So that was really the terminology we had at the time. And in terms of vision, definitely Josh and I were aligned. So just to speak frankly, Josh and I were a couple at the time. We sort of got together quite quickly after working together, and we spent 5 years together growing the business. And we've since sort of joked about the fact that the business was really what was our passion. So we were, at home together constantly. It was just constantly spoken about. It was rare that we spoke about much else.
Yeah.
So it was definitely a vision. We knew that it was not one cafe. It was like, we are going to demonstrate an alternative to the business community. We're going to show that you can do good with business. And if we can sort of inspire change, if any of these oil business owners in Scotland that are coming to the awards that we kept running every year, even as we expanded Social Bite, the business awards also just got bigger and bigger every year. And we just kind of said, if someone leaves inspired by our hopefully infectious energy with this, and decides to start a little offshoot of their own with all the money that they've got, or to do something good there, then we'll have, done our job. And that was something that was really, like, we were very passionate about. And I was so excited about that part of it, because it was about revolutionizing the economic system and kind of acknowledging that capitalism as it stands has gotten us so far, but that there were now limitations, involved with, what we're doing to the planet and production. And is there some way that business can actually also evolve? We've evolved so much as human beings. We're constantly evolving our technology, our way of communicating, our language. Why shouldn't business keep evolving as well? So that was something that we were really passionate about doing. And to do that, we knew we had to do it on a large scale. And I think we did talk about 100 cafes at the beginning. And that was before we knew what it was like to run 6 of them. At one point, I believe, including the other units we have.
Well, let's get into that a little bit. You talk about inspiring others to get involved and to take this concept back with them, and certainly you did that. I mean, and our listeners can learn from this. I mean, ultimately, you had George Clooney involved, you had Leonardo DiCaprio, Harry and Meghan. I mean, this is the kind of attention that you were attracting from a little cafe, from an idea concocted at 4 a.m. in Bangladesh, and overwhelmed by these people who had a lot less and were so generous and kind, and this desire to give back. You were now attracting the attention of the good and great in the world, and high profile stars. So have you reflected, how did you get that kind of attention, and what can our listeners learn? I mean, once you get, presumably, again, kind of, you share your reflections here, but presumably when you've got George Clooney, endorsing what you do, and Leonardo DiCaprio and Harry and Meghan, I mean, this is the start of really this brand exploding. So how did you get them in the first instance, and then what did you do with that to leverage the impact of that?
Yes, absolutely. I love this question. So I'm going to try and not overcomplicate my answer here, because the curse of knowledge. Sometimes you just okay, how we did it. The business awards, which is what we started with, right? The reason we went to Bangladesh. We kept doing that every year because the concept worked so well. It was 100% for charity. So even though we decided to sack in the events business and start Social Bite, the business awards was so in line with what we wanted to do, that we kept that going. So the first year, this is just a really basic, this is how we did it. The first year of the business awards, funnily enough, Mohammed Yunus, we got to Bangladesh and he went, I can't do that date. I'm not in Europe. So we got a very different thing from Bangladesh than what we expected to leave with. But he did come 2 weeks later. He said, if you create a different event, I'll come 2 weeks later. And we did that instead. But we had Bob Geldof in the end, did the keynote speech. He is friends with Mohammed Yunus. He could speak about social enterprise. So we had him the first year. And because of that keynote speaker, who we just took a loan out and paid his rates, to have him come and speak, which was a big risk, a big gamble. I think that's something I'd also be remiss not to mention in Social Bite's journey is Josh's capacity for risk is incredible. And my capacity to try and make that work was incredible at the time. So having Bob Geldof, he is also running in circles, or has run in circles, with people like Bill Clinton. So we got in touch with the Clinton Foundation and we said, we're running this charity auction. We knew in order to put prizes together for that auction on the first year for these very wealthy business people, you had to give them auction prizes that they couldn't just buy already. Otherwise, you're not going to sell them really well. So we were trying to sell experiences. So we got in touch with the Clinton Foundation and we said, how much would we have to raise for the Clinton Foundation for this prize in order to get like an afternoon with Bill Clinton? And they said, oh, this much. If you raise that much, we'll, and donate that to us, we'll give you an afternoon with Bill Clinton. So now we've got contact with the Clinton Foundation. So the next year comes around and we're thinking we should get in touch with the Clinton Foundation and be like, how much would we have to raise for Bill Clinton to come and speak at the award and to be the keynote speaker? And we did that. So President Clinton came the second year round, and suddenly the event has just a whole different level of credibility. So the third year round, it was easier to get in touch with George Clooney's people. I'd be like, hey, so we've just had President Clinton, just had President Clinton last year. How much would we have to pay George Clooney's charity to get him to come and speak at the awards this year? Now we're taking out the biggest room, the biggest dinner hall you can book in Scotland. And we broke the record for Scotland's largest ever sit-down dinner banquet. And it's really cool because George Clooney's charity was not on my watch. They pay for a satellite to be above South Sudan so that they can record what's going on in that country and use that evidence as evidence in the UN. So, to report, international war crimes against their own people. And so we were getting to raise money for these really cool charities and get these incredible celebrities to come and speak at our event. And we just wove into their contract, oh yeah, by the way, side note, George Clooney needs to pop by the Social Bite Cafe, have some pictures with the staff, meet some of our previously homeless employees, and which I should mention, that's not the correct term. They are people who have experienced homelessness. So yeah, that was how we did that. And from there, the next year we had Richard Branson, or maybe Richard Branson was year 3, I think, actually. Then George Clooney, then Leonardo DiCaprio. And each time we just made sure that they would get involved in the project. And, their people are very good at vetting these things. They make sure that they're not going to be involved in anything that they don't actually think is awesome and that they would actually want to endorse. So there's a rigorous process and a lot of back and forth that our team went through with their teams. And essentially they were like, this is really cool. And we would love to.
What age were you at this stage?
President Clinton was, I would have been about 23.
That's phenomenal. Phenomenal. We have a tool. Partnerships is the 9th principle of our ScaleX framework. And we have a tool, our ScaleX Expander. And it essentially invites people to our business leaders to ask a question. Who could I speak to today that would help me 10x my business? What question did you guys ask yourselves to actually, get to the point where you were phoning, Muhammad Yunus and getting in touch with Bob Geldof and then Bill Clinton? And, because for a 23-year-old, this is incredibly big thinking. So I'm really interested in the kind of the question, what was going on between yourself and Josh to kind of have some would say the boldness, the audacity to reach out to these people.
It is audacity. It's just sheer cheek. I think probably if I was going to do it now, I don't know, I would have to get a lot of coaching to convince me I could do those things.
So what's the lesson in this then, Alice, for our listeners? Because you just asked.
Yeah, but we just asked, and then I think it's asking, and then it's not taking no, and it's bothering and bothering. So for example, like Muhammad Yunus, he just said, I'm really sorry, I can't do that date. We were then in a cab, I think even to the airport, like right after meeting him, back away from Bangladesh. And I remember saying to Josh, because he was really disheartened, he was so much the visionary at this point. And I remember just saying to him, we've got to, I think we were real yin and yang. So I think having a business partner can be really great if you can balance each other out. Like when one's down, you kind of challenge the other to step up again and vice versa. So that was something Josh and I were very good at. We were very good at pressing each other's buttons and requiring more of each other when the other one was kind of starting to slip. So I think I was kind of saying to him, email him, you've got to send him an email and say, look, we are ready to dedicate our lives to social business as a concept. What can we do to keep working with you? And I think it was from there that we started to say, okay, well, I can come and do this event, 2 weeks later, if you create a separate event. So right there, that's how we started to keep Muhammad Yunus in our network. And so I think it's not taking no, and that's that kind of, we hear that a lot, but it's also meeting that with, yes, who can I speak to that can 10x my business, but what can I offer them that would be of some sort of value to them? Make them want to be involved with me. But also, I think really genuinely, we were talking about this a bit before we started today, really having those massive goals, having those big, being comfortable taking risks or being comfortable knowing you're going to be uncomfortable. So I think there was something about us, like Josh and I were quite like, I think we challenged each other quite a lot. Like
Yeah.
we're very different people. And I think, like, I remember Josh was like the big, like, we're going to get President Clinton next. We're going to do all this amazing stuff. We're going to get Richard Branson. And then I remember the year after that, our board members were a bit concerned about us continuing to try and take bigger and bigger risks. And that's what they're there for, right? Is to be governance that way. But I remember Josh was kind of bending to it and he was saying, oh, I think maybe I'll not say who it was actually because I don't want to do them disservice, but he said, oh, maybe we should just get this person. It was sort of a UK based, not super celebrity person, but, they could come and talk like, from a sports perspective about challenge and overcoming obstacles and stuff. And I just sort of said, it's just so done. Like
Yeah.
George Clooney, I just said, take it to the next level. Like, let's get exposure. Like, I was so irritated by the fact that Josh was even debating having this lower cost, lower risk event, having gone sort of Bob Geldof, President Clinton, Richard Branson. I was like, what are you doing? Like, wise up. We can do bigger than this. We've always talked about doing bigger than this. So I think it is just sheer audacity, but having a business partner that you can, I mean, it was hard as well. I need to be really honest about it and own it and say that like the challenging of each other was really good for the business, but I think we just wound each other up a lot. And, maybe sometimes we just need to be more okay with people in life kind of being there to do that, being there to get under our skin and challenge us more. Like the first few years of Social Bite, sometimes I was working like 17 hours a day. Like there was such a lot to be done. And because it was hospitality, it's like a lot of the time you're just making sandwiches rapid, like just trying to make, however, hundreds and hundreds of corporate platters that were going to go out the next day because people had called in sick and there's no one but you to do it. And managing people, it was just such a lot of work. And I think if I didn't have Josh behind me kind of being like, keep going, stop complaining. And I think if Josh didn't have me there to kind of, tell him you need to, think a bit more about, the employees here, or you need to, Josh would occasionally have panic attacks in the earlier days, and I would kind of need to make sure he was okay, and then also figure out how to try and challenge him again to do more, to go bigger. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for that dynamic that was really good for Social Bite at the beginning. And because we lived and breathed it and went home together talking about it constantly, it was relentless. So yeah, so it's one of those things I often say to people, like, if I'd known what it was going to take, I probably wouldn't have done it. And I'm so glad that I didn't know.
No, ignorance is often bliss. And it would be remiss of me before we move on back to partnerships, the ninth principle of our ScaleX framework. And, a lot of what you are saying I can relate to with Claire, my own business partner. And I love that. I often refer to the yin and yang. We're very different skill sets, very different people, see things in a different way, which just works. Have you any insights or reflections for those who are listening, who are in a partnership or about to enter a partnership? What can we do? Let me ask it a different way. If there was anything that you would change to strengthen the partnership that you had with Josh, what would that be?
Yeah, I would definitely have had some kind of contract involved. I think that's the best thing anyone can do that's co-founding an organization that's got partners involved. Even I think the reason that we didn't really do that is because it was like, well, it's a social enterprise. No one's going to make a load of money from this. That's the whole
Yes.
point. There's no
Yes.
profit involved. And I was very naive and very young, and we just went with that. But I think in hindsight, decision making is a huge thing. So if you can identify where is the decision making, what is the balance, what are the checks and balances that will be in place around that to make sure both partners are getting equal say, to make sure that there is a process at board level where they can have those decisions verified, and a proper risk register. All of that stuff can only strengthen what you're doing, but can also just really give, it takes all of the emotion out of it, because you can kind of point to the contract and go, well, it says right here it's 50-50, or it says right here that we need 2 other board members to vote with us, or it says right here. And the other thing I would say, the best advice I think would be to have almost like a couples therapy, like a like a business partners therapy, maybe a couple times a year. I mean, ideally, if you've got the money for it, or if you've got someone offering pro bono, if you can do it once a month, brilliant. But, you know, realistically speaking, if there's someone that can facilitate a conversation where both partners, or however many partners are involved, are talking about the big things with a facilitator, so that you're not also left with your own, you know, we all have our habitual reactions and we can go around and round in circles, especially when we're working with people that we're yin and yang with, where we're quite different and we've got different ways of looking at things. And if one partner has like a louder voice, or, you know, more skin in the game somehow, then they can often end up being the one whose opinion you go with. So I think having a facilitator there, and working with people and partners that are open to doing those kind of things, to make sure that everyone is heard and that the best outcomes are what you're pursuing. I think that would be incredible for anyone that's
Yeah,
working with the people.
that's great advice, great insight there, Alice. And before we move on, give us a sense of the size of the organization that you scaled, and then you left in 2020. But just prior to leaving, what was the scale of that organization, and what were your reasons then for leaving?
So we grew Social Bite to, at the time, 5 cafes on the high street in Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Aberdeen. We also had a big central production kitchen, which is where we made all of the food from scratch in Livingston. That was essentially like a big homemade factory, if that makes any sense. It's not really a factory, it's just a bunch of people making a lot of food. And then we had, you know, corporate concessions. So inside of, I don't think I'm actually allowed to say because they have such high security, but inside of like a really cool big office block in Edinburgh, that we were taking out other units for the NHS. They were building a hospital, so they needed a big cafe on site for all the buildings. So all these bizarre things we were taking on and saying yes to. And so we had about 110 employees. And at its height, I think we had about 9 different locations, including the head office, which had its own big team where we were running events and running the corporate catering and managing the workforce. So yeah, it was big. Well, for me, it felt, you know, having gone from the 3 of us, it was very big for me. And the reasons for leaving, I mean, it took such a long time. When I was 26, I had like a full-on mental breakdown, like first anxiety and panic attacks, stopped working for like 6 months. I pretty much didn't leave the house. It was I remember one of the first times that I went, that I tried to sort of muster the strength to leave the house, and I went to Tesco, which was like right next to the house. And I really thought I was losing my mind. And I was very dissociated. Like that's something that people that have extreme anxiety will talk about sometimes, is this dissociation thing. So there was a lot of confusion for me, high anxiety. And I remember being in Tesco and had like broccoli or something in my basket, and I was wandering around. Unbeknown to me, my lovely boyfriend, who I'm with here now, well, I say here, no one can see where I am, but
This will be on YouTube as well, Alice.
Okay, great. So yeah, unbeknown to me, Jamie was in Tesco at the time, and he just, you know, to be a laugh, to be playful, he kind of crept up and took the broccoli out of my basket. I didn't tell, so I looked down at my basket a couple minutes later, and the broccoli had gone. And I thought, oh, that's weird. I'm sure I picked up broccoli. I went back, put broccoli in the basket again, and then he did the same thing again because he was just messing with me. He was just being playful. And I, at this point, decided, oh my God, I'm dreaming and I can't wake up. And I put the basket on the floor and just started to cry in the middle of the supermarket. I didn't know where I was, what was going on. Obviously, he felt absolutely terrible. You know, I think for him, it was probably a bit of a celebration that I was out in the supermarket. And for me, it was just like, I might never wake up again. What's going on? So yeah, lots of that kind of awful experiences. And yeah, I also want to be really frank about the fact that like I had a huge weed dependency. And I had decided at age 26, I was going to stop completely, cold turkey which is not an expression we hear commonly in terms of weed, because it's sort of the friendlier of the drugs, you know. It's not deemed this big, it's not heroin, is it? But what I did not realize, and what I have learned a lot about since, is that our dopamine system is fundamental for our sense of motivation, satisfaction, and joy. And, you know, I am not someone that advocates for, you know, oh, people shouldn't use weed. I think weed should be legalized and information should be made accessible and care should be made accessible to everyone, because I have lots of close friends who are still, they never got out of the habit after university. They use it every day, they use a lot of it, and they are bright, wonderful people who do not reach their potential because their dopamine system is drained on a day-to-day basis. And I was watching that happen to, I mean, I had been a very high functioning stoner, like with social bite and everything. It was totally my coping mechanism. I'd be like, I can work 17 hours a day if I'm going home and having a big fat split at the end of the night. That is how I can get through this. So come 26, I went cold turkey. I took 4 weeks off. I mean, I was planning on just stopping altogether, but what I learned through that 4 weeks, as I started to feel that I was losing my mind, and more than anything, the heavy, heavy depression that came on me. I remember one day, I mean, my boyfriend and I were quite new at the time. We'd been together maybe a year, and so still, you know, kind of honeymoon period, and very, very much in love. And I remember him trying to sort of emotionally access me. Like, he was concerned because I'd stopped speaking, and as you can tell from this podcast, like, if I'm not speaking, there must be something wrong. So he was kind of saying, you know, talk to me, what's going on? And I was essentially thinking, I cannot do this anymore. I just want to check out. If I could find a way to kill myself that was not painful, I would really want that option right now. And I wasn't communicating that thought. And Jamie spent a long time trying to get that out of me. And eventually I told him what was going on in my mind. And that was where basically my best friend who I lived with at the time, and Jamie, basically begged with me and said, for the sake of your quality of life, have a freaking spliff. You know, we will figure out how to get you off of weed. We will take it down. We'll find a counseling service. We'll do whatever we have to do. But you cannot be in a place where you are, you know, considering that kind of action.
And Alice, were there warning signs as you were scaling the business that your mental health was not as robust, let's say, as it should be? Were there signs that you were ignoring? Because I advocate and I assert that, you know, our entire purpose is focused on inspiring, connecting, enabling ambitious leaders of SMEs to scale with purpose. But I assert that you will only achieve that if you get to the summit of Scale Everest and actually, you know, you're in good physical health, you're in good mental health, you feel rightly challenged, which we're all innately wired to want growth. So you feel that you've overcome challenges, and there's a sense of fulfillment for doing that. And importantly, your relationships are intact, and you can gather yourself at the summit and go, okay, wow, what a journey, you know, that was. We've achieved a huge amount. You know, let's look at what the next summit, the next version of our growth entails. But if you arrive at that summit and you're in poor physical health, mental health, and your relationships are in tatter, well, then you haven't scaled with purpose. So this insight is really important for our listeners who are in the throes of scaling. Were there signs that you ignored along the way?
Yes and no. It's a really tricky one. And I'll just be really honest that, like, the only thing I was nervous about with this coming on this podcast was speaking authentically, because, you know, social bite's such a beautiful thing, but I had such a horrible time on so much of the time. And so, you know, so I think I knew that I was working beyond my remit a lot of the time. I knew I was exhausted. I knew I needed more breaks, and I knew that some people can go and go and go. Like, Josh's capacity for work is inspirational. Like, it's incredible. But I'm not made of that stuff, but I was doing it anyway. So 17-hour days, or getting a call at 4 a.m. because the manager's sick and you got to be there by 5, but you didn't get to bed until midnight because there was a big corporate catering order the night before. Like, these kind of things, I complained about it a lot. And I kind of look back and wish I'd complained less, because it was ultimately what got us to where we went to. But I think I don't think the signs for me were as prevalent because I was using this crutch of weed every night.
Right.
I
Right.
think that topped up my dopamine levels.
Mm.
So I would, exhaust myself through the day. I mean, really, weed is not the thing you want to be using at night, because it's just going to make you more tired, but, more groggy the next day. But I think the signs in which I wish, and it's only when I really actually started going and get my own coaching from the age of about 28, a couple of years after that breakdown, I went back to Social Bite, I got back into work, I picked myself up and I kept going, and I did a different kind of work. By that point, the business was built. Like, I had, trained the staff in the different units, not well, because I didn't know what I was doing at all. I was making it up on the spot most of the time. But we had our teams in place in the cafes, the very practical side of the hospitality side of things, and building the social impact side of things with our homeless community. I had put a lot into that already, and that was now created and functioning. And so when I came back to the business after my breakdown, I was doing a very different kind of work.
Yes.
So
reflecting back now, Alice, just before we move on to what you're currently focused on in your new role, if you could go back and have a conversation with Alice prior to starting this business, to get it to the same level, what advice, because this is the stage that many of our listeners will be at, and they're in the throes of scaling their business, what advice would you give the 22, 23-year-old Alice in terms of scaling to the extent that you had scaled, building a brand that became associated with international celebrities, attracting massive interest from across the globe, now managing 110 staff? What advice would you give?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for getting me there, because I was definitely. So my thing that I really learned through that coaching that I went through, and that I'm now a massive advocate of, and what I would love to go back and tell younger Alice would be, your intuition is relevant. You've got to find a way to find some quiet for long enough to check in with your intuition. How are you feeling? That this sort of, I think, in business these days, we don't give a lot of credit to making decisions based on feeling. Yeah. But I think actually our nervous system, our intuition is really important. And if I had listened to that more, and backed myself a bit more, I think I would have had a different experience.
Yeah. Brilliant. Anything else?
So much. I think that's maybe sort of my other big lessons, are maybe stemming from that overarching message of intuition, and making time to get in touch with that part of yourself. One of the things I found really challenging was boardrooms, because I was so concerned with the day-to-day, the nitty-gritty, the real problems we were facing. And what was difficult for me was in the boardroom, that kind of level of detail was not relevant, seemingly. And so finding a way to talk about the things that I felt were really a problem in a way that these, wonderful elite business people would appreciate, I think that was really tricky. But again, I think if I could go back and tell myself, find your intuition, find what's most important here, and listen to that. It's not that you're wrong. It's just that they have a different vocabulary to you. So I look back now and I realize, things could have been even better. And I, could have done a lot to steer the company in an even better direction if I had known that what my gut instincts were actually, in hindsight now, I see that they were actually usually right. That shop location wasn't great. That way of doing things was stupid. That change of direction wasn't great. They're all things I felt at the time, but I was crap at communicating them, because I just saw it was too broad, the problems I was seeing,
Well, let's get into that, because it's a lovely segue to coaching. if Alice could have found Alice Senior, when she was 23, I'm sure her journey would have been very, very different. But ultimately, we probably wouldn't have had Alice Thompson, the coach. Now, you're in the world of coaching. You're a professional coach. Just before we get into some of the kind of the tools that you use to practice with, I'm really curious and I mean, you're coaching CEOs, business leaders now. What do you advise them to do to get in touch with their feelings so ultimately, invariably, they can make better decisions around the boardroom table?
Yes. Well, I mean, it depends on the individual 100%. And obviously, a large part of coaching is trying not to give too much advice, trying to let people come to their own conclusions and let them explore their own mindscapes, so they can figure it out. But I do have practices that I like to use. So I'm not a Wim Hof breathwork facilitator like you are, which I would love to be at some point. But I do. I am a breathwork facilitator in conscious connected breathing, and that's something that I think I will explore in a deeper way next year. Level up that training to another degree. So breathwork. Conscious connected breathing is lovely, but also just the I think I mentioned this to you at the event we met at, that the in for 7 and out for 11, or in for 3 and out for 5, the numbers are really irrelevant. It's just about breathing out for longer than we breathe in. Giving that advice is one thing, but what I do is I like to actually hold space for 5 minutes at the end of certainly the first session, because and I sort of give like a guided visualization while they are doing that breathing, because what that does is it beautifully calms down the nervous system. I explain to them how it works, that it's about blood flow in the heart. That often with business people that maybe aren't quite into the more woo terminology, sometimes it's quite helpful to explain to them this is about how much blood flow your heart perceives there to be. So this actually works on a physiological level. So doing some breath work like that to encourage them to just get still and drop down from thinking to feeling. That is something I ask them to do through that exercise while I'm facilitating. I invite them to, with each number, imagine that they're coming down from their thinking headspace into their heart feeling space. And as every time that the mind tries to trick you and starts talking and thinking of things, just go, no, 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 I know that's the mind's job, but you're not in charge right now. And then just come back down again. So I think that's a really important thing to practice. You could call that meditation, it's breath work, it's visualization, it's all of those things, but it's really just about finding some stillness so that you can check in with you and see what that part of yourself has to say, because we spend so little time there. So I think that would be that's one of the big things that I like to use in my practice.
Yeah, I love that. We're very much aligned on that. And, I think it just elongating the exhale, it just acts as a brake, just slows everything down and allows you to tune into how you're feeling. Because often when you ask somebody how they're feeling, it's just a throwaway mark. Yeah, I'm grand, or I can't complain. It's not too bad, as we say in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
But no, actually, how are you feeling? We don't take the time to stop and slow down to really tune into how we're feeling. And as you have described and shared very courageously your own story to give real credence to the importance of slowing down to tune into how you're feeling, to ultimately make better decisions. And back to what you said at the start, it was an old swimming coach used to say to me, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. You gotta slow down to speed up. But I'm curious, what attracted you into the world of coaching?
I think that was having my own coach. I went about wanting a coach around 28 because I thought, okay, I've been running this program now, very different kind of work, a fundraising events thing that I was running at Social by all over Scotland, and I thought this is very different kind of work for me. This is very business, spreadsheets, strategic planning. It's less about the sort of one-to-one deep connection with our people who were homeless to find out what their issues were and how we need to work with them. Very different work, reports and all of that kind of stuff. And I thought, I'm not sure I'm very good at this. Maybe if I find a business coach and I get some business coaching, then they'll make me into a better business person. So I started looking for a coach, and was very lucky that through Social Bites Networks, I was able to find an incredible woman called Sarah Locke, who worked with me. And it was such a different experience to what I thought it would be. I thought someone was going to tell me what to do. And I think that's a big part of my thing in general, is I'm looking for someone to validate, yes, that's right. You won't get in trouble if you do that thing. So that's what I was looking for. And I just got the complete opposite. It was, she started with me with a 3-day intensive, and I was not allowed phones. I was not allowed screens. I was only allowed her, my mind, books. I had to leave my flat. I wasn't allowed to be in my same environment to get into, a different cognitive way of being. And it was a deep dive. It was long conversations where she was really inviting me to explore what was going on, but then figure out what I actually wanted. And that was just new to me. I'd spent so long by that point, I'd spent 9 years delivering business objectives, trying to get by, but also essentially for other people, I think, like, what did the board members want me to be? What did the homeless community want me to be? What did the staff need me to be? What did Josh want me to be? What role did he want me in? Like, I think I had never really thought about actually what did I want, and can I start moving towards that? So this environment was such a deeper environment than I was expecting. And these coaching conversations were so transformative for me, that I started to really enjoy this. That's the part of me that's just innately good at that. Like, I said to you at the beginning before we got on to the podcast that, for anyone that doesn't like to have difficult conversations, or anyone that, keeps things on a shallow surface, I am a nightmare. Like, I want to have the deep conversation with you. What's really going on? What's really in the way? How can you really move forward? Do you really think that? Tell me about that. Like, that's the kind of conversations I spend, up until 2 a.m. with friends doing that at the weekends, and they often say, like, this is just so Alice, like, we'll have to get into like a 5-hour chat about this. So that is just innately who I am. And this coaching space was that, but it was being given to me rather than me offering that space. So first of all, I was able to figure my own mess out. The fact that I didn't really feel like I was utilizing my natural strengths anymore at Social Bite. The business, I'd grown it and got it to a point that it could stand on its own legs. And I could have stayed there for the rest of my life, running different projects, thinking I could have done whatever I wanted with it. But ultimately, I got to a point where, truthfully, I didn't really feel like I was a key decision maker anymore. You go from having a company with 3 of you or 8 of you with your first shop, and then suddenly one day, wow, 110 people and board members and all of that. It's not really yours anymore. And especially when there's a registered charity involved, no one owns a charity. It's voting and consensus and all of that. So I think I didn't feel needed. And for me personally, something I've really started to learn about myself since leaving Social Bite is I need to feel needed. And there's a lot of work in there that I need to do around, actually, with my own coaching, with my own development work, and what's ahead for me. And where I'm really just honestly at the moment is trying to figure out what it's like to not be needed. That's part of my growth journey. But essentially, that was something that I was feeling at Social Bite. I'm not really needed here anymore. This will go on without me. I want to do something where I'm having these in-depth, one-to-one, deep conversations with people, where I'm helping them. Yeah, that's something that I started to move towards.
Oh, there's so much in that, Alice. There's another podcast there alone. I'm curious. A few more questions before we close. I want to be respectful of time, but one thing you've mentioned: how important is it for business leaders to recognize when to get off the bus, when actually what they've created in the first instance is an organizational vision, they've served that organizational vision, and to recognize a point in which actually their unique ability, their unique skill set is no longer applied are no longer leveraged to its full potential within this particular organization. How important is it for business leaders to recognize that?
I mean, I think, I don't know if you've spoken about this on the podcast before, but founder syndrome.
I haven't spoken about it explicitly, but yes, we write about it in our own book, actually.
Yes. Yeah. So I think this is like a really hot topic. I think it's really important to understand that, founder syndrome is, the founder essentially believes that it can only exist with them and it has to be in their vision. But the reality of anything that you create in life is, and I love the way sort of artists and creative people will talk about this. It's like you create something and you put it out in the world, it will grow into something new if it's any good. And once it's something new, how much of that is yours anymore? And how much of that is what people perceive it to be, what they take it and make it? So I think knowing when to get off the bus is important. Also, just I think registering, um, when are you not helpful anymore? So
Yeah.
one thing I actually forgot to mention, you asked me about George Clooney and all the celebs and how we got them involved, and you also asked, but I forgot to answer this part. How could we leverage that
Mm.
to do something good? And so, a big part of the thing that I became really passionate about, that brought me back from this mental breakdown of mine, was coming back and realizing that there was something bigger we could do, because now we had this platform, this new credibility. We were able to be taken more serious. It's weird, like celebrities being involved just makes everyone think you're established. Like, oh, you must know what you're doing. This is a credible company.
Yeah.
But when we started a couple of young people, still didn't know what we were doing. But we were able to use that to work. By that point, the credibility gave us a platform to speak to the Scottish government at a high level and work on implementing a new housing policy. And that was this, incredible housing policy. It's very revolutionary. They use it in Finland nationwide. And this was about taking people straight off the streets and putting them straight into accommodation that was their home forever, should they choose to stay, and giving them all of the wraparound support they needed for that. So I think for me, being involved in that was like this sort of last spurt of passion and inspiration I had. Like, we've got to do this. So we implemented the largest housing first program in the UK, over
Well
600
done.
homes, over 600 people that were street homeless that now have their own homes and wraparound support to help them maintain that home. So I think once that started to come to a close for me, it was like, I don't have a next
Yeah.
thing anymore. Now that I don't have that next thing I'm working towards, and now that that has happened, I'm ready for the next
Yeah.
journey.
Yeah. Brilliant. And a couple of questions before we close, I promise. But there's something, just given the challenges that companies have with, with the great resignation, as it's termed, and you tapped in through Social Bite, you tapped into the people who have experienced homelessness and took that courageous step to employ these people. Is this is this a viable option for companies out there? Is there a resource that companies can tap into to do some social good, but at the same time actually, service the need that they have to actually bring additional people into their business?
Mm. Yeah, so there's so actually at Social Bite, all the social impact team there are incredible, and they operate something called Jobs First. So that's where they will partner up with companies, corporates, and try and find jobs within their organization that some of our service users or people who are homeless
Brilliant.
can be placed into. So look up Jobs First.
Yeah, brilliant.
That will be around in at most UK countries, I imagine. But if you're in Scotland, then Social Bite might be able to help you with that. So yeah, there's definitely a way to incorporate the homeless community. And a lot of the time, like we would meet homeless people who are homeless that had degrees, like
Yeah, of course.
PhDs and stuff. Like
Yeah.
their life went a different way. So
Yeah, no, look, we'll put a link to that in the show notes. In um, you know, I coach CEOs now also on a one-to-one basis, but also through our own program. What's the one question that you love to ask people that kind of stops them and gets them to think?
yeah, this is a good question. I think at the moment, my favorite question is to ask people, what would you do if you weren't scared? Because that just, we were talking about this before, limiting beliefs and all of that. It gives someone permission to have that narrative and see what that looks like. And I think oftentimes once you put it out on the table, well, this is what I would do if I really wasn't scared of it. you start to realize that the consequences are really not that scary, that actually that is something that you can and should do. So, but just allowing yourself to explore that option, allow yourself to explore the potential.
Yeah, I love that, and that's a wonderful question for our listeners who are holding themselves back, putting self-limiting beliefs in place, whether consciously or otherwise, in relation to their scaling ambitions. So, that's a wonderful question. I think from a practical perspective, I always say to our listeners, look, if you spent an hour listening to this podcast, act on it. And I think I would encourage everybody to kind of journal on that question at some stage today, and I suspect it will offer some wonderful insight. Alice, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. In closing, we always pose this question to our guests. Can you share with our listeners 3 timeless takeaways?
Yes, and I'm going to do this in a very what's the word? Is it lazy to give you 3 quotes?
I love quotes.
Okay. Here are 3 that's been really important for me this year. So this one's by Mo Willems. If you find yourself living in the wrong story, leave. And then this one is a definite favorite of mine. I'm sorry, I'm finding it. Here we go. Surrender and know that not everyone will get it or be as you want them to be. That one is truthfully actually something that me and my coach put together. It was a note from one of my coaching sessions, but it was been so useful for me. And then this one, which is brilliant, a really important part of anyone's development, I think, is this quote is from Carl Rogers. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, it is only then that I am able to change.
Wow. I love those, Alice. Look, it's been a real pleasure to speak with you today. I really appreciate and want to acknowledge everything you've done, and the courageousness of sharing your story. As I say, I listened to your story at the event a number of months back, and I just said, I need to get Alice on the podcast. And you've just shared so much wonderful insight and value for our listeners today. In the interest of, what would you do if you weren't scared? What's next for you?
I am doing a big talk at the Women's Business Awards in Scotland at the end of October, and I am nervous about it, but I know it'll be fine. But I have to go through this process of being scared for the first little while. So I'm putting that together, and that's probably the next thing in my immediate future. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, good luck with that. You'll smash it. Having listened to you before, you've nothing to be scared of there at all, Alice. Look, if people want to connect with you, and I've no doubt they will, where's best to reach you?
Online, you can find me at Alice Purpose Coaching. That's my Instagram, and you can find me Alice Thompson Purpose Coaching on LinkedIn. Come and find me. Let's have a chat. Let's be connected.
Brilliant. Well, look, we'll put a link to your website and to your social media handles on the podcast show notes. Alice, best of luck with everything that you're involved with. Good luck with the speech, and thanks for coming on to the show today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thank you.